this the microphone to use? Do I need to do anything? Good evening. Can those who are still standing please find a seat? Then we'll make a start. Very good evening to all of you. A warm welcome on behalf of Churches for Nephill, C4K, as we are known. My name is Peter Lelleman. I'm the minister of the Baptist Church. And we are grateful to Holy Trinity Church for hosting us tonight. We were thinking of having this in the Baptist Church, but you would not have fitted in, so I'm glad we are here. But as this is a church setting, we hope for a good debate, an honest debate with good listening and respect for each other. So this will be question and answer and no fights. A special warm welcome to our candidates and to Mr. David Gale, seated in the middle, who will be chairing tonight. And as we begin, let me say a word of prayer. Let's pray. Lord God, we thank you for bringing us here. We thank you for our freedom, for our democratic system. We ask that you grant us a useful, enlightening evening. Please help the candidates to give a good account of themselves. Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer. Amen. And now it's over to David.
Oh, good evening, everybody. Am I on? Forgot the wrong basic rule, which is switching on. Oh, that's better. Or worse. Right. Can I have the magic mic back again now, please, Peter? Because there's a magic button, yeah, because this means I'm in charge if I hold that. So welcome everyone. Just to give a brief introduction to myself, my name's David Gale. I'm one of the lay ministers here, and I was the one left holding the parcel when the music stopped as who was going to chair tonight. I used to be a teacher. By everyone's count, I've now retired 4 times. And I assured my wife this time I really mean it. But so I'm used to dealing with unruly bunches of annoying people. So I'm watching you. These guys are great. So without further ado, just to mention a couple of things. First of all, thank you very much to you people here. Firstly for coming, but also, more importantly, for standing. So important. A democratic society only works if people are prepared to do as they are And if ever you've been tempted to complain about politicians, just remember, they're prepared to do it. So let's remember that. Thank you. Secondly, can I just say how we've arranged the questions for tonight? We obviously asked for questions in advance, and we did that basically so we could have a look at them and bring them together a bit and mess them around a bit to make them maybe a little more open to all candidates. So what we have done is, if you're waiting to hear your question tonight, just be aware we may well have moulded your question in with a number of others that are on the similar theme. Also, if you wanted to ask a question to a specific candidate, we felt that it was actually probably unhelpful just to point at one particular one. So I would encourage you, if that was your question, please work directly with the candidate yourself and feel free to publicise their answer. All of us would be very interested to hear it. And now to the rules of engagement. So as traditionally, I want a good clean fight. When I say break, that's the important part. But the way we're going to be doing this is I will ask a question. The question should appear on the laser display unit above me. And then I will hand the magic microphone to the first person to answer. We'll start with Natalie on my right here, and the next question goes to start with to our second person here, and to the third, to the fourth, and so on. So everyone gets a chance to go first, and we'll pass it out to our left, your right, and then everyone will have a go. So 2 minutes each. So you get 2 minutes to answer, and at 2 minutes I will step in if you're still going to say, I think it's time to wind up. I've got a nice digital clock over there to tell me what's going on. While I'm just the person who asks the questions, I will hold on to myself the right to intervene on 2 grounds. Number 1 is if you are spending more time rubbishing the opposition than telling us what you're actually going to do, I might actually step in with, but what are you going to do? So we're going to try and keep it positive and talk about what people are actually aiming to do. And the second thing is I will reserve the right to introduce any points of information if I feel they're necessary, but I'm sure that won't be so. But I've been reading busily, spent the entire afternoon reading manifestos, so I'm really looking forward to hearing them again. So without further ado, we'll start off with question 0, asking each candidate to speak for themselves. So let me just read to you question 0. Please briefly introduce yourself, give a brief explanation of how you've helped people in the past and how you believe you can make life in Woking better for its residents. Natalie, thank you.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to see so many people here. I was actually really nervous about tonight because I'm from Knapp Hill, so if I mess this up, it will be like, ah! So, I'm Natalie. I grew up in Woking. I went to school in Woking schools and then spent a lot of time gallivanting around the country. I've been living abroad. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yeah.
And how I have helped people. I have a lifelong interest in social justice. I remember volunteering when I was still at school, collecting money for charity. As a university student, I worked on a schools project encouraging tolerance. It was mainly about racial tolerance, but it was also about all kinds of tolerance, trying to nurture that sense of respect in children for people who might be a little bit different from ourselves. More recently, I became a founder of a group supporting families who are victims of miscarriage of justice in the family law system. I am one of those people who's impacted by this, and so I'm trying to bring together people and encourage them to recognize themselves as stakeholders, to be able to articulate what they need, how they conceive of justice, and empower them to be able to approach the authorities and ask for help with this issue. So it's something a little bit like the post office scandal. So that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years, and I will continue to do that. I hope that this issue is going to become very important after the election, because I know that there are a lot of MPs who are aware of this. So I hope that our group will be instrumental in bringing a speedy resolution to this problem. In working, I will fight for justice for everybody. I believe in the truth, in honesty, and in integrity in public service, and I will always fight for the little man. I believe in clean hands, no vested interests, clean politics, and a clean planet for us all to live in.
If it's not red, then if it is red, then you're on.
Can you hear me? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to our host for this evening. So my name's Richard Barker, Reform UK. So why am I standing here? First of all, let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I spent 30 years in the global oil and gas industry, and a lot of that time was spent actually in the UK. And up until 2020, I was basically a senior leader, became a senior leader in the oil and gas industry. One of my great passions was to help manage the fantastic resource we have in the North Sea and in the Atlantic margin as best as I could. And I was head of what's called the subsurface function for the largest producer of oil and gas at the time. Yet, it wasn't until quite late in life, I think it was in my 40s, that I realized my real passion was actually building organizational capabilities. And that also requires developing people. Developing not just those people that reported to me, but helping to create new leaders of the future. And that's something I became so absolutely passionate about. Probably the greatest, for me personally, the most rewarding experience in my life was one of the reports who came to, she worked in a different part of the organization, but I'd helped her to become a leader and to create an entirely new capability within the business. And it had taken her from quite a lowly role to a senior role, and she was, when she left to move on to another position, she was utterly delighted, and she actually burst into tears when she thanked me at the leaving do. The point I'm trying to make is that I can make leaders of the future. And what Woking needs now, more than anything, is leaders. It needs business leaders. Because we have to grow ourselves out of a mess. We're in a hole. The debt is huge. It's 2.4 billion, with only a 24 million pound a year income. That's like having a mortgage of 100,000 and an income of 1,000 a year. Only by growing, thriving businesses within our community will we grow ourselves out of this hole. That means reducing tax and motivating investment, not increasing tax. So I want to go out there and talk to those business leaders, find out their needs and wants, what their challenges are, and propose reforms, great policies to them. And let's listen. Let's listen to what people have to say and take note. Thank you very much indeed.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Essie. I'm the Labour candidate for Woking MP. A bit about me. My background is in financial journalism. I worked at the Wall Street Journal for about 6 years in London and also in Hong Kong. I think in one way I helped people in that role was by reporting on the pro-democracy protests that kind of burst out there over a number of years, but particularly in 2019. That was actually what kick-started me to come back to the UK and get involved myself. When I saw the people who I was reporting on, I listened to their stories, I heard with how much passion they were fighting for one person, one vote, something that we take for granted here, I think, sometimes. Being able to promote those people's stories internationally felt very rewarding, giving them more coverage for their fight, and hopefully at some point helping that to become a reality. I'm also a local councillor, and I've had the pleasure, for me, not for them, of bringing Thames Water in front of our committee several times, the executives, holding them to account, asking why they're dumping sewage into our waters, particularly on dry days, and what they're going to do about it, and what we, if we're fortunate enough to be elected into government, will be doing about that. What do I want to bring to Woking? I think Labour wants to bring three things. First of all, stability, economic stability for the whole country, but including Woking. We'll do that by kind of toughening our spending rules so that your mortgages, your taxes, inflation all stays low. The second thing is investment. We've said that we want to create a national wealth fund in partnership with the private sector to invest in small businesses and also to create thousands of new jobs, 650,000 I think at last count. And the final one is reform. As my kind of colleague almost here next to me has said, kind of, Woking is in a really, really bad state. I don't have to tell you that. Over £2 billion in debt, the most indebted town in the country. That's unacceptable. Labour has said that we will reform local government finances. We will bring forward a fair funding review that the Conservatives have promised since 2013 and not kind of acted upon. We will also increase settlement periods. So currently, councils only know for the next 12 months how much money they're going to have. That leads to short-termism, it leads to casino tactics, which we've seen here in Woking. We're going to increase that settlement period for multiple years so that councils can plan for the medium term and that they can actually make decisions that best serve you as residents. We've also said that we're going to bring in auditors, teams of them, recruit more, so that we have this early warning system in place so that the kinds of things we've seen here, the debt we've seen here, can never happen anywhere else again. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Will Forster. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate in this election. To answer the question, I'm a lifelong resident of Woking, a local councillor and the former mayor of the borough. And I've lived and breathed Woking in my time. I've served people in Woking for over a decade, helping them with their issues. As former mayor, I raised tens upon tens of thousands of pounds for the homeless people of Woking in the York Road project. I raised awareness for that charity to make sure that businesses promoted and their corporate responsibility by promoting that York Road project. As a councillor, I've helped people with their issues, with their challenges. I've got a long record helping people. But I'm running because actually I don't think anything's working at the moment. Everything seems to be broken. Nothing's working the way it should be. I've got people, friends, colleagues, neighbours who can't afford their mortgage payments or rent bills anymore. That's because of Liz Truss's disastrous budget almost 2 years ago. The NHS has been trashed. People can't see their GP like they used to. We've talked about council finance already. Our local council went effectively bankrupt last year. And the issue that's not been mentioned yet is climate change. We locally in this hall and in our town and in our country need to play our part in fighting climate change. Those are the 4 priorities that I will focus on as your MP. I want to make sure we have a strong voice from Woking in Parliament so we can get the fairer deal we deserve. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jonathan Lord. I'm the Conservative candidate. I have had the privilege of being Woking's Member of Parliament since 2010. And over those years, it's been fantastic to meet so many people in Woking, whether it's the businesses, the charities, the churches, the GP surgeries, and all of those fantastic volunteers, many of whose sense of mission and wanting to help others comes from worship in Christian churches like this one. During that period as Member of Parliament, I have helped many, many hundreds, if not thousands of people with their individual and family issues. But I've also managed to achieve a number of things of which I'm really, really proud and I think has helped our borough, our town and our villages. So I helped to secure the Bedser hub at our community hospital that does so much to support our elderly. More recently, I secured and then managed to double the budget for the fantastic new state-of-the-art diagnostic centre that's shortly coming to our community hospital as well. We're going to get a less noisy M25 between Byfleet and West Byfleet, several important flood schemes, 70 other drainage and flooding issues solved. And it's been great to work alongside some great Knapp Hill local councillors from all different parties, but I'm particularly thinking here of Saj and Melanie and Debbie, the Conservative councillors, delivering that wonderful war memorial wall and helping to sort out problems here in Knapp Hill and expand our local schools. So I know it's been a difficult few years. The economic dislocations since COVID and the Ukraine war have been very, very difficult. And of course, as a country, we spent £400 billion to support individuals, families, businesses through COVID. But we are now on the right track. We are growing faster than all of our major European rivals. That's Germany, France, Spain, Italy. Unemployment in Woking is at just 2.9%. We've created 4 million new jobs across the UK since 2010. Things are turning around. We've led the world on Ukraine. Our primary school children are the best readers in the Western world. So things are on the right track. I do think Rishi has the right plan for our country's future. So let's not hand it over to Keir Starmer. He will be coming, I think, for a lot of people living in Woking and our villages in terms of tax, and we might go into that a bit more later. But I will certainly be that strong voice for you in Parliament, as I have been these past 14 years. Thank you very much.
I'm just trying to find where the sun is not shining in my eyes. It's going to be here. Good evening. My name's Tim Reed, and I've lived in Woking for 25 years, which I've discovered is just about long enough for you to ask that question of someone else and not be ashamed at the answer. My wife has had 2 children, which hopefully I played a part in all that, at St Peter's. Professionally, I'm a chemical engineer. I've got my Institute of Chemical Engineers tie on, because it's my best tie, and probably it's the thing I'm proudest of in my education. Locally, what have I done for other people? I was church warden of St John's Church during a period when we were switching vicars. I've been a school governor at St John's Primary School. The next 2, I've actually kept quiet from people, because if you confess to them, somebody else tries to ask you to do it again. But now I think I'm old enough not to have to worry. I did help found a youth group in Aberdeen once, and I also used to be a Cub Scout leader. I'm approaching the age where you're not allowed to be a Cub Scout leader any longer, so I'm hoping I'm now in safe ground. Why am I standing as the Heritage Party candidate for Woking? What is it about the Heritage Party that's important to Woking? First of all, top of our list, the basic principles that most of our ideas come from is our Christian heritage. That doesn't mean we're a religious party. We have people of different religions and no religions, but we recognise the importance of the Christian heritage in Britain's structure and how we do things and how we look at the world. We support a social conservative view, and we support a view that leans towards the English model of limited government. Government shouldn't do things that government doesn't need to do. If they happen naturally in society, that should be supported. For example, we are very strong on supporting the family. One of the best indicators of good outcomes for children is that they are raised in a marriage, okay? Most of the rest of the parties won't go, I think that's a third rail issue, they won't go near it, and yet it is by far the most effective thing you can do and support for good outcome for children. And we very much support it, and we're very much against the things that undermine that, and you can read about those in the manifesto where you want to. So,
I'm going to have to hurry you now, Tim.
Okay, let me just get to one other last point. You can read the rest online. I do want to raise the impact of the war in the Ukraine. Somebody put on Facebook a picture of a fete in St John's in 1919, and it was the first anniversary of the peace. This is because of the damage that these type of wars do. Right now, over 1,000 people a day are being killed in Ukraine. This is a war that could have been stopped by our side if we had put effort into it. It is suited a lot of people to keep it going, okay? And they are now moving to get conscription accepted in your minds. The American government is moving to forcibly register every single male between the age of 18 and 25. The French and German governments have recently made changes. You should be concerned. There should be answers on that.
You're going to have to finish there. Thank
Yep.
you.
Before we have any more memorials we need to worry about.
So, to question 1. That was question 0. What will your party do to increase the supply of rental accommodation, particularly reflecting on social housing and more especially suitable social housing for the disabled? Over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much. Okay, two issues here. One side is supply side, and one side is demand side. We have had 1.9 million net immigration into this country in the last 3 years. This is the elephant in the room that most of the other parties don't want to talk about. But 1.9 million people have to live somewhere. So think about that. On the supply side, social housing costs money. A country that is hugely in debt, effectively in many ways considered bankrupt, but let's just say hugely in debt. It owes pretty much a whole year's GDP, £2.7 trillion. We have to make this country wealthy to be able to afford all the services and housing that we want. And the only way to do that is to grow our economy. To grow our economy, we need to reduce taxation and encourage investment. Reform UK's policies are absolutely focused on that. They're focused on supporting the enterprise economy. Let's grow wealth. When you have money, you can afford these things. Anyone else who says otherwise, it's unicorns and rainbows, I'm afraid. Scrapping net zero will save us something like 50 to 100 billion pounds a year in reality. And unfortunately, you've been misled over what net zero actually is, because it excludes the CO2 footprint of imports into this country. So when Jonathan mentioned a week or so ago that the UK had reduced its CO2 footprint by 40%, I'm afraid under government, under the definition under the Climate Change Act, our net zero target excludes the CO2 footprint of imports. All we have done is offshore our manufacturing to coal-powered India and China, making ourselves poorer. And our actual overall footprint of CO2, when you take that into account, has barely changed. It's around 15%. And you can look at the government website. I have a copy of, I can show you that as well.
Could we talk about rental accommodation?
So the point is, rental accommodation, a bankrupt country can't afford to provide services. They can't afford to provide accommodation. That is absolutely the point I'm making. Thank you.
Thank you. The housing crisis is a really, really serious one. I see that when I'm walking around in Woking, talking to people, out canvassing. People are really concerned about where they're going to live. And I think that has been heightened by what we've seen, the crisis at the council and the the stalled Shearwater regeneration projects, where 40 affordable homes were sold off by the Liberal Democrat candidate in the council there. So that is even adding to the kind of log jams for supply. What is Labour going to do about it? We have said that we're going to close tax loopholes, and with that money we're going to build 1.5 million new homes over the course of the next Parliament. 40% of those homes will be good, affordable, truly affordable homes, and among that will be rental properties. We are going to strengthen renters' rights as well, in properties where they already are living. We want to make sure that they can take on rogue landlords if they need to. We're going to extend what is known as Awab's law. This is the 2-year-old boy who sadly died of damp and mould concerns in his housing. We're going to extend that law into the private sector so that renters can take on their landlords if the property is not up to scratch. We're also going to end Section 21 no-fault evictions, because that also disadvantages renters so they can stay in their properties. And the 1.5 million homes that we're going to build, we're going to take an inclusive approach to that. We're going to make sure that those that are multi-occupant housing, that they are built with an inclusive, accessible framework around them for people who are disabled, because it's really, really key that they are housed in accommodation that's good quality and that they can live in long term.
Need to conclude, please.
And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is an issue that's really close to my heart, because in the 90s, my mum and I will highlight my single mum and I, we were evicted by a landlord, wanted us out. The council housed us. There will be no stronger advocate for having social housing than me in Parliament. I want to make sure that what happened to me and my mum, that landlord evicting us, doesn't happen again. That's why we want to ban Section 21, no-fault evictions. But above that, I want to make sure there's proper social housing in this country. Social housing has been decimated by the right to buy, and not just the principle of the right to buy, but how it was implemented. It was designed to reduce social housing in this country. That was a tragic mistake, and that needs to be reversed. We want to empower local authorities so that they can stop the right to buy. Woking Council right now can't do it if they want to. Nationally, we need a huge house building programme. We want to build over 300,000 houses a year, half of which need to be affordable and social, so that poorer members of a society have a roof over their head. The most important thing for families is housing. The idea that we can't afford a key essential is just wrong. It's just wrong. And locally, the Lib Dems tonight have got a proud record on housing. Since we took over the council, instead of demolishing over 100 perfectly good council houses in Shearwater that have been empty for 2 to 4 years, we're bringing them back into social housing use. That's a proud record. I've got an emotional story about this. That is why you should elect me as your MP, so we can have social housing as a key issue in Parliament.
So since 2010, this country has built almost 2.5 million new homes, of which almost 500,000 are affordable homes for rent, of which 172,000 are affordable houses for social rent. But we do need to do more. We do also need to be fair to both renters and landlords. If you want to have a good rental market for private tenants, for social tenants, you need to make sure that it's a two-way street, that you have well-behaved tenants, but also that you're fair to landlords as well. Otherwise, they won't invest. So the Renters Reform Bill, which has been brought forward, there's still more to do on that, tries to make sure that you get that even balance. In those countries where they've had to have where they've decided to have rent controls, inevitably that leads to a massive decrease in the amount of rental and social rental housing available. So there is a reasonable record. That the last Labour government actually built far fewer homes, but we do need to build more homes. I think here in Woking we have a reasonable record locally, and I would just also mention that it's amazing the way that Surrey and Woking households have invited in Ukrainian refugees, mainly women folk and children, whilst their men are at war. And that has been a real accomplishment. And our councils have been great in supporting that. The government has supported it too. But the biggest thanks to go to those generous and very unselfish households who've invited people in. And that's been absolutely amazing to witness, really humbling.
Thank you. I think the first thing I'd like to address is the housing for people who are disabled, who perhaps are not a normal part of the rental area. I think that is an area where government at least must have oversight. I think charities are often very effective in this area. However, the government does need to step in. It's an important measure of whether we are a caring society, that we look after all of the people, and all of the people who are brought into our world are equally valued as human beings, and that means giving them the appropriate accommodation and the appropriate care. We do have a problem with housing in this country. Sometimes there's a bit of an issue of envy, and that's when we get into things like rent controls, etc., which we know don't work. It's been tried before, it doesn't work. It's popular, you get votes by asking it, but it doesn't work well. So if you're going to ignore the lessons of history and search for votes, you're not actually helping people. We need to bear in mind that when the government writes extra visas, each extra visa is one less piece of accommodation in the country, okay? You go and issue all those pieces of paper, somebody has to provide the accommodation that goes with it. Perhaps the way we run visas should take that into account. If you want to bring in a load of engineers from India, you should be paying something towards the infrastructure and housing that's going to be required to go with it, rather than freeloading off everyone else. And this is what's happening sometimes. Big business is effectively freeloading off everyone else. I think right to buy, actually I support right to buy. The problem with right to buy is the money wasn't allowed to be used to build, and possibly the prices weren't where they should be. One of the great problems of social housing has been areas that put a lot of problem people in the same area with no other people to help people find their way. Everyone wants to be away from the problem area, but you know what? It doesn't help. It's better to have people spread out and mixed communities, and that should be an aim of housing policy. I don't know, there is one other thing to add here. We have a very strange attitude towards housing. We see it as our wealth. We always love house prices going up, even though our children can't afford to buy. And there's a financial system behind that that is busy lending you and me money so we compete with each other to pay more and more for the same amount of housing. If there was nobody fueling that system, the cost would be less. That is something you need to think about, and that is something I'm going to be pushing internally on my party, and I would push in Westminster to dig deeper into. There was a moment when the Lib Dems had a policy on this. Vince Cable at one point was moving on limiting the amount of a loan that a bank potentially could give. They backed out of that in the end. But we need to think about this debt-fueled housing policy. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't believe scapegoating is the way to go here. We've seen that happen before. I think we're looking in the wrong direction, blaming the wrong people. There is plenty of money in this country to go around, but the vast majority of it is in the hands of 1% of the population. There is also plenty of assets. There's plenty of housing stock, but increasingly it's being bought up by people who are investing in property, sometimes buying up hundreds of units, sometimes from abroad. Those are empty homes that local councils actually have the legislative tools to bring into use, to bring those housing units into use. But they don't have the money to do it, and they don't have the staff to do it. So the next government needs to get to grips with that by properly empowering local councils with enough funding to do the jobs that they're meant to do. The Green Party is for ending the right to buy. It looks like local authorities are now trying vainly to cover their enormous debts by selling off social housing. So the stock is dwindling more and more. When it comes to rentals, yes, we would also advocate for rent caps. Rental prices are too high, ending no-fault evictions and exploitation by criminal landlords. As regards people with disabilities, Green Party policies are firmly anchored in human rights and equalities, and that extends absolutely to people with disabilities. We would support increases in the amount of support people receive, and that must also extend to housing. Everyone deserves to live a dignified life, and that includes good quality, safe, secure, well-insulated homes, including accessible homes for those who need them.
Okay, now on to question 2, and I have to declare an interest in this next question, since my wife is an ex-early years teacher, so I'm under authority here. So the question is, particularly in the light of recent discussions about putting VAT onto private schools, we here have what is effectively a private nursery. How can we ensure proper funding for preschools and early year settings in the light of what appears to be the current underfunding of education and plans to apply VAT to private schools? How do we square this circle?
Thank you. So, in our manifesto, we had to make difficult decisions. It's a fully costed, fully funded manifesto, as we want to say. And one of those decisions that we made was to end tax breaks for private schools. 9 out of 10 children go to state schools, and those are the standards that we really want to raise up to ensure that the children who do go there are not blighted, I guess, or disadvantaged for life, because what we see in the private sector is that you have English teachers teaching maths, PE teachers teaching English. That impacts on a child not just for a couple of years, but for the rest of their lives. So that's the decision that we came to. It's a decision that we're going to make. As part of those reforms, we're going to add 3,000 new nurseries into these primary schools. And in primary schools, we're also going to add free breakfast clubs for children. We think it's really important that children have a meal when they go to school, a healthy breakfast. And we also know that we've got the space in these primary schools to add 3,000 nurseries to make sure that we're kind of trying to square that circle. So this is the decision that we're making on private education, ending VAT for private schools in order to increase and improve the standards in our state schools. And that's how we would fund it.
Thank you. So to answer your wife's question, almost, we need to have a real terms increase in education spending. Investing in our children is investment in our future. If we want our pensions paid for, we need the next generation to have good quality, high-paying jobs, and education is a key part of that. But we also want to make sure they don't turn up to school hungry. We want to introduce free school meals for primary school children. Mental health has been such a big issue, particularly since the pandemic. We want to have a mental health professional in every school. If we nip this problem in the bud, it supports parents, it supports children so much. The question is how we pay for it. I disagree with Labour's idea of VAT on private schools. It does feel like the politics of envy to me. But more importantly that, as a councillor, I know so many state children, or children in state education with special education needs, get sent to the private sector. That adds to our bills. It means they won't get the proper education. And I don't think that is sensible. How we would pay for it is by tripling the digital services tax. Amazon and Google are not paying their fair share of tax. They have not paid their fair share of tax for so long. And if we're going to level the playing field to ensure that they pay their fair share and support small businesses and invest in our education, I think that is a fitting policy and a fitting balance, not victimising private schools, but not neglecting our children's education either.
So look, I think education has been one of the biggest success stories of recent years. I mentioned in my introduction that our primary school children are now the best readers in the Western world in international league tables. And our slightly older children have gone up the international league tables, the PISA league table, from 11th in maths and English, from the early 20s, and 27th, I think it was, in maths, to number 11 in the world in maths, and a huge increase as well in terms of English attainment as well, because of introducing phonics and so on. So our schools are doing a great job, our teachers are doing a great job. Those reforms have really, really paid off. We have increased the number of teachers by 27,000. There's 50,000 teacher training places now available, far more than ever before. There has been announced a big expansion in terms of early years education that many families will be able to take advantage of. I really, really think that education has to be a top, if not the top priority of any government, because obviously our children are our future. And we should not underestimate the steps and forward advance that there's been over recent years. So one more final figure, if I may. In 2010, when the Conservatives, at that time the Lib Dems as well, came into office, 67% of Surrey's schools were good or outstanding. That is now 86% and going up further. And there's been similar changes across England as well. And that's very different from the situation in Wales, where Labour have been in charge of education in Wales, and Scotland, where the SNP in recent years have been in charge of education. So there's a real litmus test there. We can do more, we can achieve more together, but let's build on that success, because it is actually truly remarkable. And a big thank you to our teachers who've helped to accomplish that.
Well, the first thing is to state the obvious. You have to have the money to deliver these things. So we've got a lot of what I would like you to do type questions so far. Not very many how do we pay for it type things. I think that's something you should bear in mind before we pile on costs. But let me say this, I worry about this Breakfast Clubs for All Kids plan because it's admitting failure. Why aren't parents, and there are sometimes good reasons, but the normal role of a parent should be to feed their child before they get to school. We need to know what's going wrong, that this doesn't happen. And we need to deal with those issues. Producing a breakfast club is what, in engineering terms, we call a tailpipe solution. It's where you deal with the problem you've already created. The problem behind it needs addressing. We need to be careful before the state replaces the family in every year of our child being brought up. There's heavy regulation being brought in early years education. They are looking to control what children think, what they can say from a very early age. And really, we need to be very cautious. This works with a family, and we need to know why families aren't able to do this. However, there will be occasions, if there's a child who's turning up hungry because there is this failure, we should still help. And these facilities should be available. But we should not be pushing to put everyone into this sort of compulsory state group as soon as the baby appears and kept away from the family. We need to support families and we need to encourage families. Possibly we need to look at ways to encourage a parent to spend a bit more time in early years with their child. And that shouldn't just be a privilege for the rich. That should be something that should be available for all parents. Thank you.
The Green Party, like the Labour Party, does support VAT on private schools because we would like to prioritise a good quality publicly funded education for everybody. I was lucky enough to be the beneficiary of that kind of education. So were many of my friends who went on to get wonderful jobs from Woking schools. And I would like to see that continue, but hearing from people working in the education sector, it is being stretched thin. And we need to fund it properly. I agree, it would be lovely for people to be able to spend more time with their children when they're very young, but the fact is that it's especially vulnerable families who need to be able to get out to work, and so we do need to be able to provide good quality early years provision and childcare, and that is something that the Green Party does commit to make sure happens. How will we finance this? You may have heard about our wealth tax. Our proposal is that for anybody with assets over £10 million, we tax them an additional 1% on these assets. I don't know if you have any conception of how much £10 million is. 1% is very little to somebody who has that much wealth. But it means a lot to our economy when that money starts to flow into our public services. We can't fund them without that. For those who own assets of more than 1 billion, it's 2%. Again, it's hardly scratching the surface for them. So, investment in education is extremely important because it's a good quality education that delivers innovation for the country and delivers good outcomes for our people.
So I'm just going to stand out of the sun because it's been bugging me a bit.
It's nearly gone.
Okay. I noticed a statistic. I think we have. I think we've got about 1% of GDP less towards the education system compared to what we had in 2010. So obviously that's put a challenge on the whole education system. In terms of what reforms policies would be, well, first of all, we would raise the basic rate of income tax. The lower threshold. You pay no income tax until 20,000 a year. So first of all, that gives everyone a bit more money in their pocket. But I think what is really key is to support marriage and support married families by having a transferable allowance of 25% beyond that. So, for example, a husband and wife could have one, if one was working and one was staying at home, they would have 25,000, the person earning would have £25,000 a year tax-free. And that really does help towards the cost of education. Thirdly, reform's policy is to, if a mother or father chooses to stay at home to look after the child or look after the children, we would front load the benefit system so that in years 1 to 4, child benefit could be taken early and front loaded to help actually fund things such as education. In terms of VAT on school fees, that's an absolute no-no. We see that as highly, and I see that as highly punitive for actually people who work incredibly hard to put their children in private school. And for those of you who heard me a couple of weeks ago at the previous Hustings, I think this is just no one's really thinking about the consequence of children who may have to be taken out of school and put into a state school from a private system. And as someone who went through that same process, I can tell you that's pretty traumatic, and I don't hear anyone talking about the consequences for the children. So, in fact, we believe in completely the reverse. Reform UK is all about freedom of choice, and we believe parents should be able to choose which school their child goes to. And in fact, if a parent wants to, if parents want to put their children through independent education, we certainly wouldn't put VAT on it. In fact, we'd have tax relief at 20% to actually encourage people to use the independent sector and take pressure off the state system. So everyone would then be a winner, rather than everyone, quite frankly, being a loser if you put VAT on school fees, because there's no benefit to the state system if you put VAT on school fees, because the extra money that you think you're going to get, well, you're going to have to spend that on all those children that are moving to that system.
Stop there, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. John, I'm going to jump on to number 4, please, because I think we've dealt with number 3 quite effectively already. I was just waiting, actually, for someone to say education, 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 because I think that did quite well once. But, let's throw a bomb in. So the 2019 election was won and lost on the promise to get Brexit done. What happened? And what do you intend to do about what happened?
Thank you. Brexit was meant to make us richer. I remember those promises. Our GDP is 4% less. Brexit was meant to make food prices cheaper. Food prices have gone up. Brexit was meant to improve our politics, give us freedom. It's not really done that either. And above all, Brexit was meant to lower immigration so we could have control of our borders. And this government has lost control of our borders. Even they are admitting it. Even they are saying it's not working. Brexit has not panned out at all. I was pro-European. I didn't think we should leave in the first place, like most of Woking. But that's the way the country voted. But I think we as a country can admit we were sold something. We were oversold a promise. Otherwise, we wouldn't be poorer. Our food bills wouldn't have shot up, and it's not just Ukraine. The fact that we've had those problems mean Brexit was a mistake. Now, politicians are not well trusted at the moment. Gambling, Gate, Partygate, expenses scandal. I'm going to be realistic and say, even though I'd like to rejoin the EU, I've got to respect the referendum, and it's not going to happen overnight. I don't think it's going to happen in 5 years. We, as the Liberal Democrats, want to restore our place in Europe, but we need to rebuild trust with Europe. We need to slowly improve relations and get trade happening again. I want young people to be able to freely study in Europe and travel. That's been offered to us outside of Europe, outside of the EU, and it's not happening at all. That's something we want to improve. Europe's place is with Britain. Britain's place is with Europe. The last 2 years, the fight with the war in Ukraine has shown us that we are stronger together. I don't want to fight a war with Russia alone. I don't want to face the challenges we as a country and as a world face alone. Climate change and other things. We need to be in Europe again and rebuild relations with Europe. Thank you.
So, what happened? Well, Brexit did get done in the end. I was one of those MPs. Virtually 99% of MPs promised before that referendum to respect the result and enact the result of the British people. Now, most MPs went back on that. I think we would have got a slightly better deal if Parliament hadn't gone in and our civil service hadn't gone into a state of paralysis over Brexit, but we did get it done. And as I said in my opening remarks, we are growing faster than Germany, France, Spain, and Italy. I think this country is big enough to be a sovereign nation. And of course we're going to carry on leading on defence and foreign policy. We've led the world on the defence of poor Ukraine. We've led the world, and we will continue to do that. So Brexit got done, but it's what we make of it going forward. We will be a sovereign nation able to make our own laws. So yes, since leaving the EU, we've been able to take VAT off tampons. Wasn't that a stupid rule? We've been able to stop live animal exports, which can be very cruel. We weren't able to do that under the EU. There's a whole host of things, environmental, financial, and we're deregulating in terms of some of the growing industries which will be the source of our prosperity and success in the years going forward. So that's AI and finance and pharmaceuticals. One last word. I was so extolling our education record last time that I just wanted to end with 20 seconds from this slot to say VAT on school fees is a terrible idea. Local head teachers of independent schools have come to me saying they're really worried. They're losing parents and children. They're losing the siblings. So it won't give the taxpayer, it won't give the Exchequer 1.6 billion. The Adam Smith Institute says it will end up costing 1.6 billion. But what heartache to all those hard-working families that just want the best for their children. Thank you.
What happened? Mostly Brexit got done. The only bit that didn't get done was due to some advice, and I was reminded by my agent that this is live stream, so I have to be careful what I say. A certain former leader of a major party advised some foreign powers about how to weaponise the agreements in Northern Ireland, which was an absolute disgrace The Lisbon Treaty Organization, because I don't think they deserve the term European Union, tried to exploit years of terrorism to gain advantage, and frankly, they should be ashamed of themselves. And all the people who are involved in that should be ashamed. The 4% figure that Will just came out with, that's an OBR forecast. This is what happens when you have a spreadsheet and you don't put all the assumptions in. He's missing all sorts of assumptions about dynamic stuff that happens. The OBR gets it wrong frequently, primarily because it's packed full of left-wing people from left-wing think tanks. And that's why they come out with the answers that they want to have. Food bills up because energy costs are up. Tractors run on diesel, diesel's more expensive, food's more expensive. Nothing to do with the Lisbon Treaty Organization. The amount of immigration we've got, it's high because somebody issued a lot of visas. Okay? Do we control our borders? Not as well as we'd like because of the ECHR, not to do with the European Union. I think this one's now dead. The only thing I would add on top of it is that the key thing here is we're having this debate and it actually matters this time. When we were before Brexit, it didn't really. The European Union decided everything that happened and people pretended they were a form of government. We are now a sovereign nation. We are responsible for the choices we make. We may not always make good choices. That's what we're arguing about. But now it has meaning.
I believe that Brexit was another example of scapegoating. It was a smokescreen for what's really happening. We should have been looking at what's happening at home, and we can see it now. Money laundering, fraud, asset stripping, our own politicians and their cronies stuffing their pockets at the public expense. I was looking today into taxation and national debt, and I learned that the UK's national debt is far higher than European countries. It is quite frightening. And the reason why our European neighbours have less national debt is because they've got sensible taxation and social welfare systems that enable sustainable long-term prosperity. Who else has got extremely high national debt? The USA. And what else does the USA have? It has a privatized healthcare system, so that when somebody becomes extremely ill, they have to bankrupt themselves to be able to afford their healthcare.
EU, please, Natalie?
Oh, sorry. So the USA is not the way to go. The European Union may not be perfect, but we can best reform it as part of it. Cutting ourselves off from our closest trade partners was a mistake. And that's why the Green Party supports rejoining the European Union when our conditions are stable enough to allow us to do so.
Right, sorry, my favourite spot over here. If one reads the news other than what you see on the BBC, you might notice that the European Union, well, let's say all things aren't rosy in the European Union, and there's an awful lot of infighting, particularly around, in recent years, about the fact that those countries within it cannot control their borders because they are forced to take a certain amount of immigration. So people have said, oh, we haven't taken back control of our borders. We could have done. EU countries can't because they have to do what the EU tells them. But we could. We've just chosen not to. The thing is, when you get your freedom back, it's up to you what you do with it. You can stab yourself in the foot if you want. You know, you really can. But you wouldn't be wise to. Unfortunately, we have, I believe, a government that does not really believe in the European Union. It appears to be more interested in the interests of the Davos set, the World Economic Forum, and its various agendas, than the British people themselves. And I think that's largely why we're in the mess that we're in. People seem to forget what it means to be sovereign. When people say, oh, what is sovereignty? Who cares? Sovereignty and exercising your sovereignty is what you're about to do in a week's time. Sovereignty belongs to the people. It is legitimately transferred to Parliament by you in a general election. When you put your piece of paper in that ballot box, you are literally voting for the people that are going to make the laws that govern you when you wake up in the morning until you go to bed at night. If you don't like those laws, you can, in the next general election, vote in a party that will stand in Parliament that represents different laws, and you have that choice to do so. However, if you're in the European Union, you're basically ceding more and more of your national powers to the European Union. And the progress through each treaty, from Maastricht in 1992 onwards, was a gradual ceding of our authority. And that was only going to go one way. Until your national parliament...
Richard, thank you.
Sorry, how long?
Need to finish, please.
Okay. Until your national parliament was basically meaningless. And just to say very briefly, the European Parliament is not a real parliament at all. It's just a parliament in name only. It's not a democracy because it can only vote on what the EU Commission puts into it. And the EU Commission is appointed. You can't vote for them. It's not a real parliament. The EU is not a real democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Brexit is still a really divisive topic within our country. It's something that I guess there's a before and an after in our history. Openly, I voted to remain. Europe raised me. I did the Erasmus scheme in Norway and learned Norwegian. I did my master's degree in Paris, and please don't ask me about my French. But the country voted to leave. This is a democracy, and that's what's happened. So we can't go back. We're not going back. But the deal that we did get was clearly not good enough. It's not been fit for purpose. Brexit got done, but what Brexit also did was help to break our country. What we're saying is that we want to go back to Europe and to try and redraw that deal, to try and come away with a better deal, one that will work a bit better for Britain and for our businesses in particular, who are struggling with the fact that they are very, very severely restricted in the trade that they can do with our nearest and largest trading partner. So what we do to kind of, I guess, keep Britain on the track that we want it to be, which is growing, healthy, strong, and taking its place on the world stage. The first thing we're going to do is to kickstart our economy. We want growth. We're going to do that by, as we've said, toughening spending rules that bring down inflation, taxes, mortgages. We're going to set up this national wealth fund together with the private sector where we can inject capital into our businesses, creating jobs, productivity, growth. In terms of supporting our businesses, in the meantime, we've said that we want to even the playing field between bricks and mortar and online retail giants who've really benefited from the business rates as they currently exist. We're going to scrap that and bring in place a new system. We're also going to help businesses by clamping down on late payments, because any type of delay in terms of payments for small businesses can be the kiss of death in terms of cash flow.
Can we get onto Europe, please?
Yeah, that's what we're going to do about the UK. We're not going back into Europe, but what we can do to help Britain and British businesses and people, despite the fact that we've left, is kickstart growth, support our businesses, and also fulfill our skills shortage that was solved by free movement by focusing on educating British people into jobs that we need for the future.
Thank you. So we're moving along rapidly. Question 5. Currently, a family only receives child benefit for the first 2 children. What's your response to that? And what do you propose to do about it, if anything?
So I think So our welfare rolls are going up at the moment, post-COVID, dramatically so. And we as a country, we want a proper safety net for those who are vulnerable, those who are poor, those who are unemployed, those who are old. But at the moment, those welfare rolls are expanding, and we need some really robust help and encouragement for those who wish to get into work. Because for too long there's been too many parts of our country which have become left behind. And once you have not just a first generation not in work, but a second generation as well, you are on your way to having a very unhappy community indeed. Because work is not just about bringing in pounds and pence, it's about self-worth, it's about giving to others, it's about being part of a wider community. And churches and charities can do something to help. But ultimately, the state and charities and churches need to encourage people to stand on their own 2 feet, to become self-sufficient. And that's through education, and that's through making sure you have the right policies. And it was not fair. So the two-child child benefit policy was a policy of the coalition government, the Conservatives, and I think the Lib Dems, if I've got this right. And what a lot of working people did not like, as they left the house in the winter months in the dark at 7 o'clock in the morning to commute to their job or whatever it might be, knowing that there was a family next door who wasn't going to get up until it was time for one of the morning shows on television that they liked. Families like that get themselves into terrible trouble, and the children are set a really bad example. So, yes, let's support families, but you can't have families that decide to have 5, 6, 7, 8 children and expect the rest of us, the taxpayers, to fund that lifestyle. That's not right. It never has been, and all the public opinion poll is very clear about that. So let's help and support the vulnerable. Let's support those in need. We have a fantastic safety net in this country, but we also need to make sure that sometimes we're tough to be tender, to get those right results and the right communities and families moving forward that will be stable and prosperous and happy and successful. Thank you.
I think I appreciate a fair bit of what Jonathan just said. I think he's correct. The major issue for people is where they feel there's some element of abuse about it, but is this the right way to fix it? The answer is probably not. We do actually have a problem in this country, and that is a dropping birth rate. And in particular groups, it is dropping radically fast. And quite recently, it's dropped even sharper. And I hope there's a question about COVID and the impacts of what's happened. The biggest event that happened to us since the last general election, I'm not sure there's going to be, but there are some very serious questions. It's a global issue. This is happening in many, many countries. A lot of countries are going to move to points of collapse shortly. Within 10 or 20 years, they will not have the population growing up to support the aging population. And it's something we should all recognise. Those of us, not everyone, is able to have the gift of having children. And we need to be careful we're not being mean when we talk about this. But for those who do bring up children, they are bringing a benefit to the whole of society, not just their family. And we do need more of our own children. And if this policy can be changed to encourage that, if some of our taxation policies and behaviours are discouraging having more than a replacement number of children, we should look at making those changes. Thank you.
One of the defining issues of this last 14 years is growing wealth inequality. And one of the really concerning aspects of that is the increase in child poverty, which has gone up so sharply that over this last period, the average height of a child born in the UK has gone down by 1 centimetre because of lack of adequate nutrition. This is bringing us back to Dickensian times. The families who are most heavily impacted by poverty are the larger families. So if you are concerned about declining birth rates, and we should be, punishing larger families is not the way to address it. So the Green Party would commit to removing the child benefit cap to stop punishing larger families.
Right. So I don't think Reform UK has got a policy on this, actually, so I'm slightly caught out. But I'll give you my view. Basically, the benefit system is there for a reason, and it's there to protect the vulnerable. That was why it was originally set up in 1911 and augmented 1913 for precisely that reason. But there really does need to be, I think, a discussion now, and as Tim said, looking right across Europe and in the UK, birth rates are falling. And that's a real challenge for all of us, particularly, who's going to look after the older people? There are many reasons why a falling birth rate, of course, is very bad for your economy and for your civilization. So I think we need to open a debate on that. But where the question is, what is the right number and how is it managed? And I don't have the answer to that now, but I think that is a debate that needs to be had. In terms of what Reform UK does do to support families, and I think this is, and I've mentioned it already, but I will mention it again. As I say, raising the basic rate tax threshold to 20,000, so you don't pay any tax at all until you're earning 20,000 a year. That will really help to balance the budgets. And also the transfer of the ability to transfer 25% of that 20,000 allowance to your husband or to your wife, whoever wants to help look after a child or children. So that gives, between if one person is working and the other one not working, you get £25,000 tax-free. And that is all money that helps. So, there's different ways of supporting this policy. But fundamentally, it needs a debate because birth rates are a real issue in Europe. And when I say Europe, of course, I mean the UK, because I'm talking geographical Europe as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we need to be careful with the tenor of our debate and to make sure that we're not demonizing people in our society for things that are perhaps outside of their control. People end up on benefits for a whole host of reasons, many of which are not fun, and I'm sure that the majority do not want to spend their lives on benefits. What I will say is that the TUC came up with some research recently that said since the Conservatives and the Lib Dems in coalition, but since 2010, 900,000 children of working parents have fallen into poverty. So this is an issue of making work pay more than it currently does. We've come out with a new deal for working people that we think will help to get people back into work, into good jobs, meaning that they can live lives that they are proud of and thrive and not just survive. This new deal means raising the minimum wage to a point that's actually a living wage and not whatever it is currently, which is not quite a living wage. It means ending fire and rehire tactics, which are not acceptable. It means banning the use of 0 hours contracts, which keep people trapped in poverty. They have a job, but they're not given hours, so they can't work anywhere else, but they're not working there. That all contributes to a lack of, not a very high salary coming into families, meaning they're looking to go on benefits as well as working. That shouldn't be the case. It should be one or the other, and very limited use. We also want to ensure, as we've said, that children, we have 3,000 new nursery places so that children have somewhere to go, so their parents can go to work and feel supported earn a wage, support their families. So I think this is an issue about work, making it pay, and making sure that people can find solid routes into work rather than demonising people.
And could I just ask, Essie, before you sit down,
Yes.
cap on 2 children or not?
We have said that we wouldn't remove it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to answer this question, but I'll be honest, which for a politician is sadly far too rare. My party made a mistake capping child benefit. I was ashamed about it at the time, and they have realised it was a mistake. We will end the cap in this election. Conservatives and Labour are not. Making a mistake and fessing up, still did wrong. But acknowledging it, knowing it's not great, and then playing on ahead is shocking. This is the single most important thing the government could do to tackle child poverty, is ending that cap. Children in 21st century, Woking, Surrey, the UK, are in poverty. And politicians could do something about it, and we're deciding not to. We need to tackle child poverty, and that's why lifting the cap is so important. But it's wider than that. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has reviewed the Liberal Democrat, the Conservative and the Labour manifestos. And they've said, our manifesto does the most for the poorest in society. And I'm proud of that.
Okay. So I got lost. You did start, didn't you, Jonathan?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I'm just taking a view here. I'm noticing it's coming up to 10 to 9. We said we'd finish at 9. Who's in favour of carrying on till about 20 past? Hands up if you think that's okay. Who'd rather go home? I'm going to declare the 15 the winners, because I'm sitting here and you can't see.
But maybe we just cut our answers down a little bit to 1.5 minutes or something.
Okay, well, how am I going to judge 1.5? Anyway, okay, I'm going to pretend I know what 1.5 minutes is then.
You can get a lock across in 1 minute.
Right, well, let's see. Okay, let's try that. Let's try very quickly. Okay, this one should be interesting for a minute. So we're starting with Tim for this one. So how does your party plan to meet the needs of today with ensuring that we protect our planet and our future? And what is your climate pledge?
Right, I think I'm going to start at the end of the question and be straight with you. We do not buy the climate emergency thing that was suddenly thrust on everyone and pulled out of nowhere. I suspect I'm probably the best qualified technical person here. You're a geologist, so you'll just have to accept that. He knows more about the history of what's happened in the past. I'm sure he'll mention it, and it's going to be hard on 1 minute here. But here's the thing. Even if what you are being told was true, which, by the way, we've now had enough time go past to know isn't the case, you're doing the wrong thing, spending the billions upon billions on this net zero stuff. What you should do is you should spend the money on mitigation for the changes. So the action we're taking is wrong. The basis that it's been done on is wrong. What we would do is ensure we have energy security, the lights stay on, energy stays cheap enough that we still have industry and people have jobs. And all the stuff we've been arguing about for benefits for children and for schools and all that stuff, that will actually have to happen. Now, I told you I'm on the perhaps older end of some of these candidates. That means I can remember what happens when governments run out of money, when chancellors of the Exchequer have to turn around and go back because the IMF have come. That when you really get into a sufficient amount of debt, the fact that nobody will lend you any more money cuts your throat. We are, now that we've given up on our natural resources, we are close to not being able to pay our bills, okay? And the costs are going up on the basis of energy. So our answer is man-made global warming, unproven. Even if it was true, you're doing the wrong thing. What you are doing, and by the way, you notice how they keep pushing this at you. No, this is really important because if they keep pushing this at you...
That's why we have to have 5 other people say it as well. Please.
Anyway. Yeah, I've made my point. So here you go. I told you 1 minute would be difficult.
I did say I would be prepared to jump in on points of information. I think it's fair to say that the climate emergency wasn't sprung on us. Over to you, Nancy.
Tackling the climate crisis is the need of today. Our children have got the right to expect to have a future, to not have to deal with rising sea levels and increasingly extreme weather events. They would like to have 4 seasons. They would like to be able to see snow. They would like to have clean air to breathe. We need to be investing into research and tech development. We need to be innovating and putting all of our efforts into finding ways to address the climate crisis. That's where our energies should be going. That's where we can excel. As a country, we're really good at solving problems. So that's what we need to be doing right now.
Right, Tim, thank you for your introduction to the dumb geologist. So, for those of you that don't know, we are in a natural warming cycle. The world goes through constant warming cycles and cooling cycles. The climate has always changed, is changing, and will always change. Since the last ice age, about 8, 9, 10,000 years ago, the Earth has warmed on average, we estimate, about 6 or 7 degrees. And during that time, humanity has flourished. It struggled to get through the last ice age, but as it warmed, it flourished. What made the temperature right now the right temperature and 1 degree warmer suddenly terrible? And the question is whether we could do anything to stop it anyway. So the Norwegian Statistical Office just published a paper back in September. This is the government statistical office of probably one of the most progressive countries in the world. It basically said there was no evidence, and it's impossible to say, the contribution of man and the emissions of CO2 to global warming. We simply cannot understand, we cannot calculate or estimate whether it is simply just natural warming. So the question is, do we have a problem that we can actually solve anyway? We could throw everything at this. Net zero will bankrupt this country. It will bankrupt the West, potentially for no effect whatsoever. And I go back to my earlier point about imports. Because we exclude imports from our net zero target, that fridge you import from China, we import from China, and you put in your house, the CO2 that was produced making that fridge with coal power in China is excluded under the target. So it's so easy. We can simply brush all that CO2 under the table and pretend it didn't happen and virtue signal in this country. But the world doesn't change the world at all because the CO2 is floating out there. It's been produced in China and it just wafts around the atmosphere. It makes no difference. So all we're doing is destroying our economy for nothing. It's insanity. This is literally the definition of insanity.
Time's up, please, Richard. Thank you.
There is a climate emergency, and under Labour, we are committed to getting to net zero. We are also committed to ensuring that green thinking about the climate, our planet, is something that we translate across all of our policies, not just our environmental policies. One route that we are taking is setting up what we are calling Great British Energy, a nationally owned energy company that will roll out clean renewable energy that will help to lower people's bills and residents and businesses. It will also help to make us more energy secure, and we think that this is one key way that we can go forward protecting our planet. We are aware, though, that it's quite expensive to make this transition. It's not going to be easy, and we are providing subsidies, low interest loans for people who want to decarbonise their homes, change their boilers, solar panels, make them insulate them, that sort of thing. We think we need to do these things because the cost of this not doing it will only become more expensive as time goes on. But yeah, thank you.
The overwhelming amount of scientists in the world say climate change is a threat and man-made, despite what the other two gents on the panel say. When my party leader, Ed Davey, was the cabinet member for climate change and environment, he trebled the amount of renewable power we have in this country. And we've got a plan to make sure we've got 90% of our electricity generated by renewable energy. We need to protect the clean air we breathe and ensure we don't have homes that are flooded and we don't have the immigration that some people are so concerned about, flooding from countries that are now too hot. Climate change is a real threat. Don't have people kid you otherwise.
So since 1990, this country, the UK, has halved our carbon emissions while still managing to grow the economy by 80%. So we are one of the most, if not the most, of the larger countries, successful countries in the Western world in terms of decarbonising, yet keeping our economy strong. But I really do worry going forward. So Rishi Sunak, when he became Prime Minister, has introduced a more pragmatic element to policy making. The fact that everyone was not going to be able to renew their gas boilers. We know that Ford, in terms of motor cars, so even with the strictures that at the moment are still in place, we know that some of our major manufacturers won't be able to sell enough percentage of electric vehicles to be able to carry on selling the rest of their ranges. So I'm sure he won't mind me saying, but the proprietor of the local Honda garage came up to me at a recent local event saying, Jonathan, your government or a future government has to be more pragmatic here. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to sell cars because not everyone wants to buy an electric vehicle and the infrastructure is still not fully there to support them. So going forward, I think Rishi Sunak has shown that we'll be more pragmatic, but our country is taking the lead, and rightly so. One big bugbear of mine is nuclear. We absolutely need the clean energy of nuclear going forward. And I'm proud of the fact that every single nuclear plant in this country was started under a Conservative government. And finally, after some delay from the previous government and indeed this current government, we are now going really fast into small modular nuclear reactors, investing a huge amount of money, including 700 million in Sizewell. And that will give us a lot more energy security going forward, but it will also be clean energy. And it really worries me that the Labour Party is against nuclear, and when I last looked, they were also against our North Sea oil of gas and gas. So the Conservative government became more pragmatic particularly after the energy crisis subsequent to the Ukraine invasion. We need, as we get cleaner and cleaner energy, we need to have our own oil and gas. It's worth tens, if not hundreds of billions of pounds to the economy. It's actually greener, obviously, than importing oil or gas or dirty coal from elsewhere. So whilst it's there, we should exploit that on our way forward to a cleaner future. And Labour would cancel that. That's 200,000 jobs gone. And I don't want to be at the mercy of people like Putin or elsewhere, or other regimes elsewhere in the globe, having to import dirtier energy over longer distances because we needlessly shut down our oil and gas industry too early. That's nonsense. Thank you.
So I think we're going to manage one more serious question, and then I've got one more for you after that. So let's talk about the first past the post system. I got some stats. At the last election, the Conservatives gained 43% of the vote, but 56% of the seats. By the way, I've chosen the two parties here purely on the basis of the difference in stats rather than for any particular purpose, other than to demonstrate the difference. So Conservatives, 43% vote, 56% seats. Lib Dems, 11% vote, 2% of the seats. Now, does that seem fair to you? And do you think it should be changed?
No, first past the post does not seem fair to me. I think it's really demoralising for people because they do not feel that their votes count. They don't feel that their voices are represented. And that's, I think, why we have so much apathy. People don't even feel they can vote for the party that they want to. We have to change things, and a good way to start would be to introduce proportional representation. It does include some risks. Yes, it does mean that, we might see parties coming and taking, pieces of the pie of power that we wouldn't like, but that's democracy. So the Green Party does support proportional representation.
Try to keep it to 1 minute, please.
Okay, so there was a time when there was a choice in politics. The established parties actually stood for something different. But actually, if you look at what is written rather than listen to what is said, if you actually look at the policies of the main established parties, they're very similar. I'm just going to give one little example, and this is why I'll come to my second point. So take the oil and gas industry, which a gentleman has professed to support. Jonathan has professed to support it. The Conservative government, I've worked in the oil and gas industry for 30 years. This Tory government has virtually destroyed our offshore oil and gas industry. They brought in a 75% windfall tax. There's currently no windfall, but that windfall tax is still there. Labour will make it 78%, but 75% has already done the job, which is why many companies are already packing up and leaving. The industry is in crisis, no matter what you say, or what people say on this panel. So, and I know very well, I have many friends who are in that business. So net zero is the same. Everyone else, apart from Tim on this panel, is totally pro net zero. And as I've tried to explain, it is simply, it's a deception to the British people, and it's bankrupting us, because it's not really net zero at all. Finally, and hence, because those policies are so similar, so there's no real choice in politics in the established parties. That's why I'm standing here. And I also believe that proportional representation is now absolutely critical for us going forward, so that all voices, particularly ones that get quite a large percentage of the vote, but very few parliamentarians in Parliament potentially, people need to have their voice in Parliament. Otherwise, it's a death of democracy. Thank you very much.
This, unsurprisingly, is an issue that comes up a lot for me when I'm on the doorstep. It's in my inbox a lot. People stop me and they want to talk about it. It's a live issue. It's an important one. And I like discussing it because it means that people are really willing to engage with our democracy. We have always been of the opinion that you have to win under the system that you have. We have a first-past-the-post system for all its flaws, and we are, if we're fortunate enough to enter government next week, we will have had to do that. We will only have gotten there by having to win under the current system that we have. But I recognise, as does Labour, that it's not a perfect system. We recognise that people are upset and that they are interested in change. And I think there's an honest and serious discussion to be had about that, and that we should continue this discussion. But it's not something we feel like we can say yes or no on at this stage, because we're not in government yet. The Conservatives haven't made that change. They've decided not to. We're not taking anything for granted in the polls. We want to make sure that we're out fighting for every vote, talking to every voter. That's how we have to do this. If we're fortunate enough to enter Parliament on the 5th of July, I've been assured this is a discussion that we're going to have. But at this point, we need to win with the system that we have.
I'll answer the question. Of course it's not fair. The current political system is broken. I said that at the start. The Lib Dems have long argued for proportional representation. And I'll give 2 examples in the time I've got. Woking Council, no Conservatives. A Surrey Council without Conservatives. Yes, they're unpopular at the moment for local national reasons. But the fact that there's no Conservative councillor highlights the ridiculousness of first past the post. As much as I was happy not to be serving on the council with the Conservatives, it actually highlights the system we've got is wrong. Essie is a councillor in London and in a London borough that's clearly always going to be quite Labour-leaning. But it's not so overwhelmingly Labour that there shouldn't be any Lib Dems, there shouldn't be any Conservative councillors. It's ridiculous. Proportional representation balances out. It makes sure all voices are heard. First past the post flatters the people that are slightly in front. And that isn't fair and it's not reasonable and that needs to change.
So, first past the post, over many, not just decades, but generations, has been a system that has actually worked in the sense that you elect a government, normally the biggest party. That party, therefore, has to be a broad church in order to get that number of electors. And then in 4 years' time, or 8 years' time, or 12 years' time, or wherever it might be, when you want to change, and the other lot look as though they could do a better job, you chuck the rascals out, okay? So that has worked. And it's different to other countries whereby you get coalitions. In particular, I know that PR is big amongst those perhaps of a centre and left of centre persuasion. But in lots of European countries, you now have the populist right in government. So be careful what you wish for. Having said all that, it is possible that we are going to have a very lopsided result this time. And I think everyone will want to look very carefully at things, and I'm happy to put down my own personal preference and look carefully at things going forward. But there is one great thing about our first past the post system, and that is that every constituency in this country sends its own member of Parliament to Westminster. And just like with a national government, you can say, that's enough, we prefer the other lot, you can judge that person on their record. I think I've got a strong record, and I urge you to re-elect me. Thank you.
The answer is yes, we would support a stronger proportional element. Personally, I'm not going to name a system, but personally I quite like the Scottish system of additional members because it solves the problem that Jonathan just mentioned. You still have a constituency MP, but if lots of you vote for whoever, and you do it enough across the country, you have some representation and a voice as well. The problem we have in politics is worse than this, though. The problem is our parties are generally controlled by other interests. Both parties have had, during this election, the 2 leading parties, issues with candidates being parachuted in from the centre, with Keir Starmer bots or Rishi's wet candidates from central office being put in. They were put into a place where my grandparents used to live, in Billericay and Basildon, and I hope they get the result they deserve. But this is a real problem for us. Because you want to influence politics. You want to, if what's happened is all the choices have actually been made before the election turns up, and you get a load of false issues turn up, then actually you're not getting your choice. You're not actually having the sovereignty to control your government. And one of the great innovations on this, which sadly everyone's forgotten, was actually, Jonathan, you were a prime example of it, an open primary. The Americans have this, where they have a first past the post system. Everyone could have voted for who the Conservative candidate was, including Liberal Democrats. Some of them probably did. This is the issue. Currently, Conservative candidates are, for the set of interesting rules, all of which are suspended when general elections, get called when other people have holidays booked. The only thing I haven't been on today to get here is an aeroplane, okay? The rest of the list of transport, I've done it on the way here, and that's thanks to Mr. Sunak. I do get summer off, but it's been a real pain, I have to tell you. But this is the issue. You want more control over your government. It's not just the electoral system. You need feed into the parties. Membership of political parties is very low. okay? And even if you had higher membership of those parties, your influence is very low. We need to find a way of improving that. And then perhaps government wouldn't force very unpopular policies on young children and on the nation on things like net zero. I know, well, I was going for that just at the end because I knew I could get away with it.
Yeah. There's always one naughty child in the class, isn't there? So, thank you very much for your serious answers. Could I ask you one 30-second answer, possibly one sentence? So, what will you do at 10 p.m. on July the 4th? Richard?
Gosh. What will I do? 10 p.m. July 4th. I'll probably just sit down and breathe a sigh of relief.
I will thank my team. The local party have been amazing running this campaign. We've been out every single day knocking on doors, talking to voters. But yeah, I think I also will just sit down and have a cup of tea, I think.
So I will be in Woking. I know exactly where I'll be in Woking. I will be having a drink, an alcoholic drink, with my team, watching the exit poll come in, as we hope for the result that we've worked very hard for, and that I hope you elect me as the MP for my hometown. I'm not sure exactly what alcoholic drink it will be, but it certainly won't be a cup of tea.
I will also be broaching a glass of chilled white wine and watching the exit poll with my team. And everyone says this is a foregone conclusion. It might be, but we don't know. The great thing about our general elections, and we should always just say this, we do live in a democracy. It is our choice, it is your choice as to who you want as your MP, who you want as your government. And like Rishi Sunak, I will be fighting up to the very last moment for your support. Thank you.
I think that was 9:59 you were talking about there.
Well, I hadn't realised everyone would be drinking. We're all going to be up all night. In truth, we're all going to meet again, and it's to go for the great British tradition of watching the ballot box opened. It's always a sobering experience, most of the time. 10 years ago, it was a bit better, but that's slightly different. 8 years ago. But here's the thing. What will I be doing? There'll be a sense of relief. From the personal point of view, I'll feel pleased that I stood up and said something that I think needed saying, and started something that I think needs starting, okay? It's the start of a long process, but it requires the courage to stand up and say something is wrong, and I'll be pleased that that's been done. I'll have to think about it before next time, but maybe the drink will help.
I've got in my heart an overriding need to be with my family. Whatever happens on the 4th, there are going to be some big changes ahead of us, and it's all been very turbulent for a lot of us, and we're going to be entering a new era. I feel I will probably want to just go to sleep and just, hope that, things are going to get better. They will. And I don't know, I think support of our family and friends, it's going to be really important going forward. So, huge sigh of relief. Yes, probably a drink as well. And good night's sleep.
Well done. So, I think it's probably just as well that we were reminded that after all this drinking, the count is a sobering experience, isn't it? So, let me just finish by just thanking again our candidates for coming and putting themselves out on the line for you. Thank you to those who sent in your questions. Thank you for the person who sent in the one that I dare not read out, and you'll never know from me what it said. But, no, there is. Yeah, I think. But I think there are still laws of libel in this country, aren't there? So just to finish off with that great statement by Winston Churchill, that democracy is the worst system of government in the world, except for all the others. And we rejoice in the fact that we live in a democracy, whatever form that takes, and we're so glad that we're able to spend this time this evening to do some democracy together. And last of all, can I just finish by, as I'm sure all the candidates would do, vote. Please tell everyone you meet to vote, because remember, if you don't vote and you don't like someone, their people are voting. So keep voting, tell people to vote, make sure they vote, because democracy may be the worst system, but it's better than all the other ones, and we're grateful for it. So thank you to all the candidates, thank you for coming, and good night. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Very well. Well done. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.